The wrench slipped from Daniel Hurst's hand and clanged against the concrete floor at the exact moment his phone buzzed with a message from the school. His daughter Lily was sick. Again. And he had exactly $40 in his account and 3 cars waiting to be fixed before noon. He wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white and picked up the phone. The nurse's voice was calm, but every word landed like a small hit. A fever. Please come get her. He looked around the garage, at the half-open hood of a sedan that belonged to a man who had already called twice, asking when it would be ready, and he felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever the world asked him to be in 2 places at once. Daniel was 34 years old. He ran Hurst Auto Repair, a small shop squeezed between a laundromat and a shuttered bakery on the edge of Millbrook, a town that had once thrived on factory work and now survived on habit. He had inherited the shop from his father, along with the debt that came with it, and for 2 years he had been raising Lily on his own, ever since her mother died in a car accident that Daniel still thought about every single day, though he tried not to let it show. He grabbed his jacket, locked the garage door, and left a handwritten sign that said "Back in 1 hour," hoping the sedan's owner would not notice the exclamation point he had angrily added and then crossed out. He drove to the school with the radio off, because silence helped him think, and thinking helped him stay calm. At the front office, Lily sat wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, her cheeks flushed, her small hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. She looked up when she saw him and managed a weak smile. "Daddy," she said, "I didn't mean to get sick." He knelt down in front of her, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "You never mean to get sick, sweetheart. Nobody does. Let's get you home." As he carried her bag and walked her to the truck, he passed a group of mothers standing near the entrance, waiting for their own children. He recognized 2 of them from the neighborhood. Their conversation dropped into a whisper the moment he walked by, but not quiet enough. "That's the mechanic," one of them murmured. "Raising that little girl all by himself. Can you imagine?" "He probably barely makes rent," another added, not even bothering to lower her voice much further. Daniel kept walking, his jaw tight, his eyes forward. He had heard versions of this conversation more times than he could count. Sometimes it was about money. Sometimes it was about whether a man could really raise a daughter without a mother in the house. Sometimes it was simply about pity, which stung more than mockery ever could. He had learned not to react. Reacting gave people something to talk about. Silence, at least, gave them nothing. He buckled Lily into her seat, checked her temperature with the back of his hand out of habit, even though he had no thermometer with him, and drove home slower than usual, glancing at her in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Their house was small, with a porch that needed painting, and a yard that Daniel mowed himself every other Saturday. He carried Lily inside, tucked her into bed with a glass of water and a children's fever medicine he kept stocked in the bathroom cabinet, and sat with her until her breathing evened out into sleep. Only then did he allow himself to sit down at the kitchen table and open the folder he kept hidden in a drawer, the one with the bills. Rent for the garage, electricity, the loan payment on the equipment his father had bought years ago and never finished paying off. He did the math in his head for the 100th time that month, moving numbers around like puzzle pieces that refused to fit, no matter how he arranged them. There was a knock at the door. It was Nora Bennett, his neighbor, a retired school teacher who had appointed herself as an unofficial guardian to both Daniel and Lily since her own children had moved away. She held a pot of soup in her hands. "I saw the truck come home early," she said. "Figured something was wrong. Lily's got a fever," Daniel said, stepping aside to let her in. "Thank you for this. You didn't have to." Nora set the pot on the stove and turned to face him, her expression softer than her usual brisk tone. "You look tired, Daniel. More tired than usual." "I'm fine," he said, the way he always said it. "You're always fine," she replied, "even when you're not." She glanced toward the hallway where Lily slept. "That little girl is lucky to have you, whatever anyone else says." Daniel gave a short laugh that had no humor in it. "Not everyone thinks so." Nora's eyes narrowed. "Let me guess. The mother's at the school again." He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "People talk because it's easier than helping," Nora said. "Don't let it get under your skin." "It doesn't," he lied. After she left, Daniel returned to the garage to finish the sedan, working late into the evening under a single hanging light. the radio humming quietly beside him. He liked working at night. There were no customers watching him, no whispers drifting through open windows, just the quiet click of tools and the satisfying sound of an engine that finally ran the way it was supposed to. He thought about his wife sometimes while he worked, especially on nights like this. She used to bring him coffee when he stayed late, sitting on an overturned crate and talking about nothing in particular, while he worked underneath a car. He missed the sound of her voice more than almost anything else. The next morning, Lily's fever had broken, but Daniel kept her home from school anyway, just to be safe. He set her up on the small couch in the corner of the garage with a stack of books and her favorite blanket, and she spent the day quietly doing homework and drawing pictures of cars while he worked. It wasn't the first time she had spent a day at the shop, and it wouldn't be the last. She was, in many ways, more comfortable among wrenches and engine oil than most children her age were among toys. Around midday, a car pulled up outside that Daniel did not recognize. It was sleek, dark, and clearly expensive, out of place among the pickup trucks and older sedans that usually rolled into his lot. Smoke curled faintly from beneath the hood. A woman stepped out, dressed simply in jeans and a plain jacket, though something about the way she carried herself suggested she was used to rooms falling quiet when she entered them. She looked at the smoke, then at the garage, her expression somewhere between frustration and resignation. "Please tell me you're open," she said. Daniel wiped his hands and walked toward her. "We're open. What happened?" "I don't know," she admitted. "It started making a strange noise about a mile back, and then this happened. I was driving through and I have no idea where I even am." Daniel popped the hood and examined the engine, asking her a few quick questions about the sounds she had heard and when the trouble started. Within a few minutes, he had a rough idea of the problem, though he wanted to look closer before saying anything for certain. "It might take a couple of hours," he said. "You're welcome to wait inside if you'd like. There's a chair, and probably some very old magazines." She smiled, the first genuine smile Daniel had seen cross her face since she arrived. "That's more than most places offer. Thank you." She stepped into the small waiting area at the front of the garage, glancing curiously toward the corner where Lily sat with her books. Lily looked up and gave a shy wave, and the woman waved back before settling into the worn chair. Daniel returned to the car, but he could feel her watching him work, not in the judgmental way some customers did, checking to see if he knew what he was doing, but with a quiet curiosity, as if she was trying to understand something about him that had nothing to do with engines at all. He had no idea, in that moment, that the woman sitting in his waiting room was about to change everything he thought he knew about his life, his shop, and what the future could hold for him and his daughter. He only knew that her car needed fixing, and that was the only thing on his mind as the afternoon light shifted across the garage floor, and the sound of Lily's pencil scratching against paper filled the quiet spaces between the clinks of his tools. Her name was Claire Whitfield, though Daniel did not learn that until later in the afternoon, when she finally introduced herself while sipping from a bottle of water he had offered her. She spoke carefully, the way people do when they are used to being asked questions they would rather not answer, and Daniel, sensing this, did not press her about where she was from, or why she was driving through a town like Millbrook in a car that probably cost more than his shop was worth. Instead, he talked about the problem with her engine, using plain words instead of technical jargon, showing her the worn belt that had caused the smoke, and explaining exactly what he planned to do to fix it and why. Most mechanics, she said, either talked over her head or assumed she wouldn't understand anything at all. She appreciated that he did neither. "You explain things like you're talking to a person, not a wallet," she said, watching him work. Daniel laughed, a real laugh this time. "That's because you are a person. Funny how some folks forget that." As the hours passed, Claire found herself drawn into conversation with Lily, who had grown bold enough to leave her corner and inspect the strange, glossy car with wide eyes. Claire crouched down to Lily's level and asked her what she was drawing, and Lily proudly showed her a sketch of an engine, complete with labeled parts that she had clearly learned from watching her father. "You know more about cars than most adults I've met," Claire said, genuinely impressed. "Daddy teaches me," Lily said. "He says knowing how things work means you never have to be scared of them." Claire glanced toward Daniel, who was bent over the engine, unaware that his daughter had just repeated one of his own quiet philosophies word for word. Something about the moment settled in Claire's chest, a small, warm realization that this shop, however modest, was built on something rare. She spent the rest of the afternoon watching him work, occasionally stepping outside to take a call that she kept short and hushed, glancing back toward the garage, as if worried she might miss something. Daniel noticed but said nothing. It was not his business what kind of calls she took, only that her car got fixed and she got back on the road safely. When the repair was finally finished, Daniel gave her an honest price, lower than she expected, and explained exactly what she had paid for, part by part. Most places would have charged double for a stranger passing through, especially one driving a car like hers. Claire noticed this too, filing it away along with everything else she had observed that afternoon. "You could have charged me whatever you wanted," she said, counting out the payment. "I wouldn't have questioned it." "I don't charge people based on what I think they can afford," Daniel replied. "I charge them based on what the job actually costs. Simple as that." Claire studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide something. "Not many people operate that way anymore," she said quietly. "It's a rare thing." Before she left, she knelt down once more to say goodbye to Lily, telling her that her drawing of the engine was one of the best she had ever seen, professional artists included. Lily beamed, and Daniel felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in his chest, watching his daughter shine in front of a stranger who had taken the time to notice her. Claire drove away as the sun began to dip toward the rooftops of Millbrook, and Daniel returned to closing up the shop for the day, already turning his mind toward dinner, homework, and the endless list of small tasks that made up his evenings. He did not think much more about the woman with the expensive car, other than to hope she made it safely to wherever she was going. He had no way of knowing that Claire Whitfield was not simply a woman passing through town. She was the founder and chief executive of Whitfield Logistics, a company that managed vehicle fleets and transportation contracts across dozens of states, worth more money than Daniel could imagine, even in his most hopeful daydreams. She had been driving through Millbrook that day on her way to inspect a potential distribution site nearby, alone and without her usual driver, because she had wanted a few hours of quiet before a difficult week of meetings. What she found instead was a small garage that ran on honesty, in a way she had rarely encountered, even among businesses far larger and far more polished than Daniel's. She thought about it during her drive, and she continued thinking about it long after she reached her hotel that evening, scrolling absently through emails without truly reading them, her mind circling back again and again to the mechanic who explained engines like he was talking to a person, and the little girl who drew pistons and belts with the focus of someone twice her age. Meanwhile, life in Millbrook continued exactly as it always had for Daniel. The following week brought new pressures, each one small on its own but heavy in combination. His landlord, a stern man named Mr. Bishop who owned most of the buildings along that stretch of road, stopped by unannounced on a Tuesday morning, holding a clipboard and wearing the expression of a man who enjoyed delivering bad news. "Rent's going up next month," Bishop announced without preamble. "Property taxes went up. Everybody's rent is going up." Daniel wiped his hands and tried to keep his voice steady. "By how much?" Bishop named a figure that made Daniel's stomach drop. It was nearly double what he currently paid, an amount that would swallow whatever thin margin kept the shop afloat. "That's a lot," Daniel said carefully. "Is there any room to talk about it?" Bishop shrugged, unmoved. "Take it or leave it. Plenty of other businesses would love this spot." After he left, Daniel stood in the middle of the garage for a long moment, staring at nothing, doing the math in his head again, the same numbers rearranging themselves into shapes that still did not work, no matter how he tried to force them. To make matters worse, a new garage had opened up on the other side of town a few months earlier, owned by a man named Gary Pruitt, who had wasted no time spreading rumors about smaller shops like Daniel's, hinting to anyone who would listen that older independent garages cut corners and used cheap parts to save money. It was not true, not for Daniel's shop, but rumors rarely needed truth to spread. Daniel began noticing fewer familiar faces pulling into his lot, and more cars driving straight past toward the newer, shinier building, with the big sign and the free coffee machine in the waiting room. He tried not to let it show in front of Lily, keeping his voice light during dinner, asking about her day at school, helping her with spelling homework at the kitchen table, while his mind churned quietly beneath the surface. But children notice more than adults give them credit for, and one evening, as he tucked her into bed, she asked a question that caught him completely off guard. "Daddy, Are we going to be okay? He sat down on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? I heard you on the phone, she said. You sounded worried. And some kids at school said their moms said we might have to move. Daniel felt something twist painfully inside his chest. He had been careful, he thought, keeping his worries contained to late nights and closed doors, but apparently not careful enough. He took her small hand in his. We're going to be okay, he said, and he meant it, even though he wasn't entirely sure how. I promise you that. Things are a little hard right now, but hard doesn't mean impossible. You understand the difference? Lily nodded slowly, though the worry did not entirely leave her eyes. Daniel stayed with her until she fell asleep, and then he sat alone in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about his father, who had built this shop from nothing, who had taught him everything he knew about engines and about honesty, and who had always said that the measure of a man was what he did when things got difficult, not when they were easy. The following Saturday brought a school fundraiser, one of those events where parents gathered to sell baked goods and raise money for new playground equipment. Daniel brought Lily, along with a batch of cookies he had baked the night before, slightly uneven but made with real effort. He set up their table near the edge of the gymnasium, watching as other parents arranged elaborate displays of homemade treats, some clearly purchased from expensive bakeries and repackaged to look homemade. A cluster of mothers stood near the punch bowl, glancing occasionally in his direction. He recognized them from the school pickup line, the same women whose whispers he had overheard weeks earlier. This time, their comments were not whispered quite carefully enough. Look at him, trying so hard, one of them said, not quite hiding her smile behind her cup. It's almost sweet, in a sad sort of way. I heard his shop might close, another added. Guess we'll see how sweet it is when he's out of a job entirely. Lily, standing beside her father, heard every word. Daniel saw her small shoulders stiffen, saw the hurt flash across her face before she quickly hid it, the way children learn to hide pain far too early when the world gives them enough practice. He knelt down beside her, keeping his voice low and steady. Don't listen to them, sweetheart. People who need to make others feel small are usually the ones who feel small themselves. But what if they're right? Lily asked quietly. What if the shop does close? Daniel looked into his daughter's eyes, searching for the right words that would be honest without being frightening. Sometimes things get hard before they get better, he said. But I am not giving up. Not on the shop, and definitely not on you. Not ever. Lily nodded, though Daniel could see the worry still lingering in her expression as they packed up their unsold cookies and walked to the truck in silence. That night, after she had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone in the garage long after closing, staring at the ledger of numbers that refused to balance, feeling, for the first time in a long while, genuinely uncertain about the future. He thought about selling the shop, about finding steady work elsewhere, perhaps at the very garage that had been stealing his customers, swallowing his pride for the sake of stability. He thought about moving somewhere cheaper, starting over in a town where nobody knew him or judged him. Every option felt like a small defeat, a quiet admission that the whispers had been right all along. It was in this low moment, staring at numbers that refused to add up, that his phone rang with a number he did not recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, too tired to deal with another unfamiliar caller, but something made him answer. Is this Daniel Hurst? A familiar voice asked. This is Claire Whitfield. We met a few weeks ago, when my car broke down outside your shop. Daniel sat up straighter, surprised. Of course, I remember. Is everything all right with the car? The car is fine, Claire said, a hint of warmth in her voice. Actually, I'm calling about something else entirely. I was wondering if you might have some time to talk. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, if you're willing to hear me out. Daniel glanced around the empty garage, at the ledger still open on the workbench, at the quiet street outside where Gary Pruitt's brightly lit sign glowed in the distance. He had no idea what Claire wanted to discuss, but something in her voice, calm and certain, made him feel, for the first time in weeks, a small flicker of something that almost resembled hope. I'm listening, he said. Claire hesitated for a moment before speaking again, as if choosing her words carefully. I'd rather not explain everything over the phone, she said. Would you be willing to meet me tomorrow, somewhere in town? I promise it won't take long, and it will be worth your time. Daniel glanced at the clock, then toward the hallway where Lily slept peacefully, unaware of the conversation happening in the next room. There's a diner on Main Street, he said. Rosie's. Open early. I could meet you there before I open the shop. 7 o'clock, Claire said. I'll see you then. That night, Daniel barely slept, his mind turning over every possible reason a stranger with an expensive car might want to meet with him. Part of him wondered if this was some kind of scheme, though nothing about their earlier interaction had suggested dishonesty. Another part of him, quieter and more hopeful, wondered if perhaps this was simply what it felt like when good luck finally decided to knock on a door that had been closed for far too long. He arrived at Rosie's diner 10 minutes early, taking a booth near the window, ordering coffee he barely touched. When Claire walked in, she looked different from the woman who had stood beside her broken-down car weeks earlier, her jacket now replaced with a tailored blazer, her posture carrying a quiet authority that Daniel had not noticed before, perhaps because he had not been looking for it. She slid into the booth across from him, ordering black coffee from the waitress before turning her full attention to Daniel. I owe you an explanation, she began. When we met, I wasn't entirely honest about who I am, not out of any bad intention. I simply wanted a few hours where nobody knew my name or my company, where I could just be a person whose car had broken down. Daniel raised an eyebrow, curious but not yet alarmed. And who are you exactly? My name is Claire Whitfield, she said. I run a company called Whitfield Logistics. We manage vehicle fleets for businesses across several states, everything from delivery trucks to service vehicles. It's a fairly large operation. Daniel had heard of Whitfield Logistics before, vaguely, the way most people knew the names of large companies without understanding exactly what they did. He studied Claire's face, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate joke, but found only sincerity. Okay, he said slowly. I appreciate you telling me, but I'm still not sure why any of this involves me. Claire leaned forward slightly, her coffee forgotten. Because what I saw in your shop that day is something I don't see very often, not even in businesses far larger than yours. You were honest with me about a repair, even though you had no idea who I was, and could have easily charged me far more than the job was worth. You explained things clearly, instead of talking down to me. And your daughter, she added, softening slightly, clearly adores you, and clearly learns from you every single day. Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride and confusion. That's just how I run my shop, he said. I don't know how to run it any other way. That's exactly the point, Claire said. My company works with hundreds of vehicles that need regular maintenance, repairs, inspections. Right now, we contract with several large chains for this work, and frankly, the quality has been inconsistent, and the costs have been climbing without any real justification. I've been looking for a different approach, something built on the kind of integrity I witnessed in your garage. Daniel sat back, processing her words slowly. Are you saying you want to hire my shop? I'm saying I want to explore a partnership, Claire said carefully. Something bigger than a single contract. I've been considering a model where we work with small, independently owned shops like yours, shops with a proven reputation for honest work, and build a network around them, rather than relying entirely on large, impersonal chains. Your shop would be the first piece of that idea, if you're interested. Daniel's mind raced, trying to grasp the full weight of what she was proposing. It sounded almost too good to be true, and years of hard lessons had taught him to be wary of things that sounded too good to be true. I have to be honest with you, he said slowly. This sounds incredible. It also sounds like exactly the kind of thing that could fall apart the moment reality sets in. I've got a landlord threatening to double my rent, a competitor spreading rumors about my work, and a daughter depending on me to keep a roof over her head. I can't afford to gamble on something that might not be real. Claire nodded, unoffended by his caution. That's fair, and I'm not asking you to gamble anything. I'm proposing a formal agreement, with real contracts and real numbers, reviewed by lawyers on both sides. I'll have my team put together a detailed proposal, and you can take it to your own advisor, or a lawyer of your choosing, before signing anything. I'm not interested in taking advantage of you, Daniel. I'm interested in working with you because what you do is rare, and rare things deserve real investment, not charity. Something in the way she said the word charity settled Daniel's nerves slightly. He had feared, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this was simply an elaborate act of pity, a wealthy stranger swooping in to save the poor struggling mechanic and his daughter, the kind of story that made people feel good about themselves, without actually respecting the person they claimed to help. But Claire's tone carried none of that. She spoke to him the way she might speak to any business partner, with respect rather than sympathy. What exactly would this partnership look like, he asked. Claire pulled a folded paper from her bag, sliding it across the table. It was not a formal contract, simply a rough outline of ideas, numbers, and possibilities. To start, we would route a portion of our regional fleet maintenance through your shop, enough to stabilize your income immediately. If that works well, and I believe it will, we would discuss expanding your shop, perhaps bringing on additional mechanics, using your business as a model for similar partnerships in other towns. You would remain the owner. This isn't me buying your shop, Daniel. This is me investing in it, and in you. Daniel read through the paper slowly, his eyes catching on numbers that seemed almost unreal, compared to the figures he had been staring at in his own ledger the night before. He thought about Mr. Bishop and the looming rent increase. He thought about Gary Pruitt's rumors and the empty spaces in his appointment book. He thought about Lily's small, worried voice, asking if they were going to be okay. "I'll need to think about this," he said finally, folding the paper carefully. "And I'll want a lawyer to look everything over before I sign anything." "Of course," Claire said, seeming pleased rather than offended by his caution. "I would be worried if you didn't want that. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this offer." They spent another half-hour discussing details, Claire answering his questions patiently, never once making him feel foolish for asking. By the time she left the diner, Daniel felt something he had not felt in a very long time, a cautious, fragile sense of hope, the kind he was almost afraid to fully trust. Word of Claire's visit spread through Millbrook faster than Daniel could have anticipated, though he had told almost no one except Nora. Somehow, within days, whispers began circulating that the mechanic's shop had caught the attention of someone important, someone wealthy, someone connected to a name people recognized from business news. Nobody had the full story, which meant everybody filled in the gaps with their own imagined versions. The same mothers who had whispered about him at the fundraiser now watched him with narrowed, curious eyes when he dropped Lily off at school, clearly trying to piece together what they had heard. Gary Pruitt, sensing a shift in the wind, began asking around about Daniel's shop with far more urgency than his usual rumor spreading, worried perhaps that his newer, shinier competitor was about to be outmatched by something he could not fully understand. Daniel ignored all of it as best he could, focusing instead on reviewing the proposal with a lawyer Nora recommended, a careful, no-nonsense woman named Diane Marsh, who specialized in small business contracts. Diane spent nearly a week combing through every line of the agreement Claire's team eventually sent over, calling Daniel with questions, flagging clauses that needed adjustment, negotiating small changes that protected his interests. To Claire's credit, her team accommodated every reasonable request without complaint, adjusting terms, clarifying language, ensuring that Daniel retained full ownership and control of his shop throughout the process. By the time the final contract was ready, Diane herself admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that it was one of the fairest agreements she had reviewed in years. "This is legitimate, Daniel," she told him during their final call, "and it's a good deal, a really good deal. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little surprised." Daniel sat at his kitchen table that evening, the final contract spread out before him, Lily asleep in the next room, unaware that her father was about to make a decision that would change both of their lives. He thought about his father, who had built this shop from nothing, and always said that hard work deserved to be rewarded, even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. He thought about the whispers, the rumors, the landlord's threats, and the quiet, persistent fear he had carried for months, that he might not be enough to give his daughter the life she deserved. He picked up the pen, signed his name at the bottom of the page, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that the ground beneath him had finally stopped shifting. The first truck arrived on a Monday morning, a white delivery van bearing the small, understated logo of Whitfield Logistics on its side panel. Daniel stood in the doorway of his garage, watching it pull into the lot, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and disbelief that refused to fully settle, no matter how many times he read over the signed contract sitting on his desk. The driver, a friendly man named Oscar, stepped out and greeted Daniel with a firm handshake. "Heard good things about this place," he said. "Guess we'll see if the reputation holds up." "It will," Daniel said, and he meant it completely. Within the first month, 3 more vehicles from Claire's regional fleet began rotating through his shop for routine maintenance and repairs, exactly as she had promised. The income was steady, reliable, and enough to finally silence the anxious calculations that had kept Daniel awake so many nights before. He paid off the overdue portion of his equipment loan, caught up on the rent before Mr. Bishop's increase ever took effect, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to imagine a future that did not involve constant financial worry. Word of the partnership eventually became impossible to keep quiet, especially once the Whitfield Logistics vehicles became a regular sight, parked outside the small garage on the edge of town. Millbrook, being the kind of place where news traveled faster than most people could keep up with, buzzed with speculation and disbelief in equal measure. Gary Pruitt, whose newer garage across town had been steadily pulling customers away from Daniel for months, reacted with a mixture of confusion and thinly disguised jealousy. He stopped by Daniel's shop one afternoon, ostensibly to borrow a part he claimed he was short on, though Daniel suspected the visit had far more to do with curiosity than actual need. "Heard you landed some big fancy contract," Gary said, leaning against the doorway with forced casualness. "Must be nice." "It's a good partnership," Daniel replied simply, refusing to take the bait. "Built on doing honest work. You're welcome to try that approach yourself." Gary's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing more on the subject, leaving shortly after with the part he claimed to need, though Daniel noticed he never returned to pay for it, nor did the rumors about cut corners and inferior parts continue circulating with quite the same energy as before. Whether Gary had simply lost interest or realized that Daniel's growing success made the rumors far less believable, Daniel could not say for certain, and honestly, he found he no longer cared much either way. The mothers at the school pickup line, once so quick with their whispered judgments, now offered polite, almost nervous smiles when Daniel arrived to collect Lily each afternoon. A few even approached him directly, asking careful questions about his shop with a curiosity that barely masked their surprise. Daniel answered politely but briefly, unwilling to indulge conversations that felt more like damage control for wounded pride than genuine interest in his well-being. Lily, for her part, seemed to sense the shift in how people treated her father, though she remained mostly unbothered by any of it, far more interested in the new set of miniature tools Claire had sent her as a gift after their diner meeting, a small toolbox designed for children, complete with a note that read, "For a future engineer, from someone who believes in you." As the weeks passed, Claire visited the shop periodically, ostensibly to check on the fleet vehicles and discuss expansion plans, though Daniel began noticing that her visits often extended well beyond what business alone required. She would linger over coffee, asking about his day, listening with genuine interest as he described the small victories and occasional frustrations of running an independent shop. She asked about his late wife once, gently, and listened without offering hollow condolences, simply acknowledging the weight of what he carried. During one such visit, as Lily proudly showed Claire a small engine model she had built using her new toolbox, Daniel finally worked up the nerve to ask a question that had been quietly nagging at him for weeks. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, once Lily had wandered off to find a snack. Claire nodded, setting down her coffee. "Of course. You mentioned once that you understood what it meant to raise a child while running a business," Daniel said carefully. "Do you have kids of your own?" Something shifted in Claire's expression, a softness that Daniel had not seen from her before, even during their most relaxed conversations. "I have a son," she said quietly. "His name is Theo. He's 12. His father and I separated when Theo was very young, and since then, it's mostly been just the two of us. Though admittedly, I've had far more resources available to me than most single parents ever do." Daniel absorbed this information slowly, pieces clicking into place. "That explains a lot," he said. "The way you talked about integrity, about not wanting charity. That wasn't just business philosophy, was it?" Claire smiled, a little sadly. "No, it wasn't. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, even with money behind me. People assume that because I run a company, I must not really be present for my son, that somewhere along the way, I chose ambition over motherhood. It's exhausting, constantly proving that those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding settling over him with unexpected weight. People assume things about single parents no matter which side of the income gap they're standing on, apparently. "Apparently so," Claire agreed, a wry smile touching her lips. From that conversation onward, something between them shifted subtly. a deeper layer of understanding forming beneath the professional partnership that had brought them together in the first place. Claire began bringing Theo along on some of her visits to Millbrook, and the boy, quiet and thoughtful, quickly formed an easy friendship with Lily, the two of them bonding over shared enthusiasm for anything mechanical, spending afternoons in the garage tinkering with old parts while their parents discussed business nearby. Daniel found himself looking forward to Claire's visits in a way that went beyond simple professional interest, though he was careful not to examine that feeling too closely, wary of moving too quickly, wary of letting hope outrun reality, the way it once had with the initial contract. Meanwhile, the shop itself continued to transform. With steady income finally secured, Daniel hired his first employee, a young mechanic named Felix Grant who had recently graduated from a technical program and struggled to find steady work, despite his obvious skill. Daniel remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, to have talent that nobody seemed willing to invest in, and he made a point of giving Felix the kind of opportunity he himself had once wished for. Felix proved to be a quick learner and an even quicker friend, bringing energy and enthusiasm into the shop that had, admittedly, grown a little quiet and lonely during Daniel's hardest years running things entirely on his own. Together, they expanded the shop's capacity, taking on more of the Whitfield logistics contracts as Claire's confidence in the partnership grew, eventually adding a second bay to accommodate the increased workload. Not everything moved smoothly, of course. There were growing pains, moments where Daniel worried he had taken on more than he could reasonably handle, nights spent poring over new paperwork and logistics that felt overwhelming compared to the simplicity of running things alone. Claire's team offered support during these moments, connecting him with resources and advice, though she was always careful to let Daniel make his own decisions, never once making him feel as though the success of his shop belonged to anyone but himself. One evening, several months into the partnership, Daniel sat on his porch watching Lily and Theo play in the yard, tossing a ball back and forth while Claire sat beside him, both of them quiet, comfortable, in a silence that no longer felt like the careful distance of strangers, but something warmer, something neither of them had quite named yet. "I never thanked you properly," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence, "for seeing something in my shop that day, for not treating it like charity." Claire turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't do this because I felt sorry for you, Daniel. I did it because you reminded me what it looks like when someone builds something real, something honest, even when the whole world seems determined to overlook it. That's not something I extend to just anyone." Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer evening air. "Well," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, you reminded me that not everyone who walks into this shop is looking to take advantage of a struggling single dad. Some people just want to help build something good." Claire smiled, and for a moment, neither of them said anything further, simply watching their children play in the fading light, two families slowly, carefully becoming something that neither of them had expected to find on an ordinary afternoon when a car happened to break down outside a small garage in a town that had, until recently, seemed determined to overlook the man working quietly inside it. A year passed, and the small garage on the edge of Millbrook barely resembled the struggling shop it had once been. What started as a single bay with one exhausted mechanic working himself thin had grown into a bustling operation with 3 full-time employees, a steady stream of Whitfield logistics vehicles rotating through for maintenance, and a reputation that now stretched well beyond the borders of the town that had once mocked its owner behind cupped hands. Daniel stood in the newly expanded garage one morning, watching Felix train a fresh hire named Priya, a sharp young woman who had shown up months earlier looking for an apprenticeship after hearing about the shop's growing reputation for fair, honest work. It still amazed him some mornings, standing in the middle of it all, remembering the nights he had spent hunched over a ledger that refused to balance, wondering if he would have to close the doors his father had first opened decades earlier. The rent increase that had once threatened to push him out of business felt like a distant memory now, easily absorbed into a budget that no longer required desperate calculations at the kitchen table each night. Mr. Bishop, the landlord who had once delivered his ultimatum with barely concealed indifference, had grown noticeably friendlier in recent months, stopping by occasionally with unnecessary small talk that Daniel accepted with polite amusement, recognizing it for exactly what it was. Gary Pruitt's garage across town had quietly closed its doors several months earlier, Unable to compete once word spread about the quality and reliability of Daniel's expanded operation, Daniel felt no satisfaction in his rival's failure, only a quiet vindication that honest work, given enough time and the right opportunity, tended to outlast rumors and shortcuts in the end. When Gary called one afternoon, his voice noticeably humbled, asking if Daniel might have any openings for an experienced mechanic looking for work. Daniel considered it carefully before offering him a trial position, choosing to extend the same fairness to Gary that he tried to extend to everyone who walked through his doors, regardless of how they had once treated him. The mothers from the school pickup line, the same women whose whispered judgments had once stung so sharply, now greeted Daniel with genuine warmth, some even bringing their own vehicles to his shop for routine service, seeking him out specifically after hearing about his reputation for fair pricing and honest diagnostics. A few had the grace to apologize directly, admitting they had judged him unfairly without ever bothering to know him. Daniel accepted these apologies graciously, though he made a quiet point of never bringing up the past unless someone else raised it first, choosing instead to let his actions speak for whatever character needed defending. Lily, now 9 years old, had grown even more confident and curious, spending countless afternoons in the garage alongside her father, occasionally alongside Theo when Claire visited from the city, the two children forming a friendship that had deepened into something steady and genuine over the past year. She had recently declared, with the absolute certainty only a 9-year-old could muster, that she intended to become an engineer someday, designing cars instead of simply fixing them, a dream Daniel encouraged with quiet, fierce pride every chance he got. Claire's visits to Millbrook had become a regular fixture of their lives, no longer tied strictly to business matters, though the partnership between Hearst Auto Repair and Whitfield Logistics continued to thrive, having expanded to include 2 additional independent shops in neighboring towns, built on the same model of fair partnership that had first transformed Daniel's small garage. Claire often joked that Daniel's shop had become something of an accidental case study within her own company, proof that investing in honest, independent businesses could be both profitable and genuinely good for the communities involved. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, neither of them rushing toward something neither had expected to find. What began as quiet dinners after the children had gone to bed, and long phone calls discussing everything from business logistics to childhood memories, had gradually deepened into something neither Daniel nor Claire felt the need to hide or explain away. Millbrook, being the kind of town that noticed everything eventually, had certainly taken notice, though the whispers this time carried a distinctly different tone than before, curious rather than cruel, warm rather than mocking. On a quiet evening in early autumn, Daniel stood on his porch watching Lily and Theo chase fireflies across the yard, while Claire sat beside him, her shoulder resting lightly against his, both of them content in the easy silence that had grown between them over the past year. The porch, once in need of paint, now gleamed with a fresh coat. Daniel had finally found the time and money to apply, a small but meaningful symbol of everything that had changed since the day a smoking engine had first brought Claire Whitfield into his life. "I keep thinking about that day your car broke down," Daniel said, watching the fireflies blink lazily in the deepening dusk. "If it hadn't happened, I don't know where we'd be right now, probably still buried under bills, wondering how much longer the shop could survive." Claire turned her head slightly, studying him with the same quiet warmth that had first drawn him to her, all those months ago. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe you would have found another way through. You strike me as someone who doesn't give up easily, even when everyone around him assumes he will." "Maybe," Daniel agreed, "but I'm glad I didn't have to find out the hard way." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, listening to the children's laughter drifting across the yard, 2 families who had found their way to each other through circumstances neither of them could have predicted, built not on charity or pity, but on mutual respect, shared struggle, and the simple, stubborn belief that honest work and quiet resilience deserved to be recognized, even in a small town that had once been far too quick to laugh. Word of Daniel's story eventually spread beyond Millbrook entirely, first through local news coverage of the innovative partnership between Whitfield Logistics and a network of small, independent auto shops, and later through a longer feature that highlighted Daniel specifically, the single father who had built something remarkable out of nothing but skill, honesty, and an unwillingness to give up on his daughter's future. He gave the interview reluctantly, uncomfortable with attention even after everything that had changed, though he agreed eventually, hoping his story might offer some quiet encouragement to other parents fighting similar battles in towns just like his own. When the article finally published, Daniel read it once, quietly, alone in the garage after closing, before folding the paper carefully and placing it in the same drawer where he had once kept his most anxious bills, a small, private reminder of how far he and Lily had traveled together, from a struggling shop nobody believed in, to something built to last, standing steady and honest, in a town that had finally learned to see him clearly. Outside, the evening settled softly over Millbrook, over the quiet garage with its lights now glowing warmly long after most shops had closed, over the porch where laughter still echoed between two families who had found each other by chance and chosen, deliberately, to stay.